Hey, part two. So, the pie crust has been sitting in the fridge since yesterday, and it can kind of look kind of funky do because we have those parts of the Crisco was not totally broken up, so it's going to kind of sit there because they've gotten bigger. So I'm going off because my flour is kind of off to the side there. So I just get a big bunch of flour and put flour down. And like I said, the recipe says that it's the original recipe that I got off of All Recipes says that it is not, it's a no roll pie crust, but I still roll it out. But like I said, it's nice because it's fixable. So got trash. So typically what I do is I will go through and do my pie crust first and get that rolled out because when you do your apples, they can get browned, and you put lemon juice on those, but to help that. But so you can see I'm just kind of like squishing it out. So one thing that I usually always forget, rings are off. I already did that. I already got my pie pan out. So it's Pyrex brand, and it's 9.5 inch. So it doesn't matter though which ones you get. It says it's microwave safe. No stovetop, no broiler on it, but it's a little bit deeper than the metal ones that you can get. So I kind of like that because I like to make a deeper apple pie. I got my rolling pin out. I've already got my thing to slice on the top just because my hands are going to be goopy, and that'll come later. So, so this is actually the first step that I do, but I've done some things out of order just so that way I don't have to stop and pause and all that stuff as much all the way through this. So as you can see on there, I'm just kind of just making sure that it's covered in flour so that way it's not as sticky, and I can just start rolling it out. And other little trick I learned, as you saw, I just kind of brushed some of that flour off from in front of me because I end up getting coated in flour, which I already am. So I just kind of roll this and just start in the middle and roll out. And I keep checking the thing because Dad actually filmed the crust making portion of it. So that way I didn't have to pick up and move everything. But, you know, he's out of town. So, so I just kind of just roll this out from the center out to the edge, also knowing that I'm going to be putting, cutting off the edges of this, so it doesn't matter that the ends aren't as flat and even. So I don't know, 1/4 inch, I don't know. It's thin. I'll show a picture. So I'm just putting some flour on top. So there's several ways that you can go through to put this into your pie crust pan that can be usable. So I like to make sure that I've got that on the bottom. And one thing I forgot to get out was the little scraper thing. You don't have to use this obviously, but it's just kind of nice to kind of go underneath. You can use like a flipper spatula to kind of help with it, but it just helps those ends. So you're going to fold this into fourths. So you lift that, fold that over, and then fold over again. And then you can use this little bench scraper here to move stuff over. Like I said, some of the best tools I've had are some of the kind of non-tech ones. So I've got a fairly large piece here, and you go through and you try to get that corner so it's pretty much in the middle. So you're taking up a fork and you just unfold. So there's all different types of ways you can go through. This crust is a lot more forgiving than the other ones. And you can see it's kind of falling apart here, and that's okay, and ripping. And that's what's nice about this one. If you're doing a different type of crust, sometimes I've seen where you roll them out between sheets of wax paper So then you can just kind of flip it over on that. But I kind of like this. So I'm just tucking in all the edges, as you can see. And so I've got, I don't think I've got any rips in here, but you can see here along the edge, I've got some that's, you know, it's hanging down all the way around. And then I've got right here where it's not. So I like to go through and have enough to be able to fold up. So I'm going to patch that a little bit, but I'm going to grab a paring knife here so I can cut around the edge. So I'm going to cut this here. I pretty much like to just let that hang down about like that far. And so that's looking pretty good on that side. Over here, there's a little bit more. It's a little bit longer, so I'll just kind of cut it. It doesn't really matter. And you can cut, you can rip, however you want to do it. So I'm going to show you, like right here, it's kind of ripped right there. And so I'm just going to just place that over the top and just kind of press it down. And then I'm going to trim. So and these end pieces, like I said, are kind of the thicker part where it didn't roll out. So I'm just kind of squeezing it on the end there. So now I've got this section here that I want to fix. And so I'll just get one of these parts that are mostly rolled out and maybe put a little bit of extra flour on there so it doesn't stick. And I can press that with my hand, or I can get my roller out and roll it whichever way you want. And so then I just kind of piece it on there and just squeeze it together. So one thing I learned, I need to kind of wiggle my mouse a little bit on my trackpad just to make sure it doesn't freeze. So sorry, that's what I was doing. Okay, so I've got my bottom crust on there. Just kind of get my little dangly parts off the edge. So I've got that done, so that way once I get my apples ready, I can just automatically just straight go. So I'm going to set this off to the side and just to get ready for stuff. And the one other thing that I forgot to do, as I'm talking off camera, and I'm also eating some of my pie crust, is I did not preheat my oven. So I'm going to go through and turn the oven on at 450. This last little bit of my crust is going to be the top crust, and I'm going to roll that out later. But I'm going to, I saved my, the wrap, so I'm just going to put that in there, and I'm going to stick this in the fridge with the other crust that I actually had sitting out, and that's okay. And I'm just kind of pushing that off to the side. So I'm going to step off for a second and put my pie crust back in the fridge. So at this point, is when I would get my apples ready. But what I would do first, and I've got the recipe, I'm going to put it in the comments down there. So the first thing I'm going to do, though, is I've got my pastry ready, and then I'm going to combine, and it's 4 tablespoons of flour and 3/4 of a cup of white sugar, and I'm going to combine that with cinnamon, and that's a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and then also with a 1/2 teaspoon of Penzey's apple pie mix. So I use the Penzey, as you know. It says it's the China cake. This is, I think, the Penzey's blend. That's pretty much the only cinnamon I use anymore is the Penzey's blend cinnamon. So it's a blend of all of them. but I just keep them in that bottle. So apple pie spices, it's got the cinnamon, a mix of 2 different cinnamons, some nutmeg, mace, and cloves are in there. So I think I told you, Tabor, that in my all recipes, I've got my apple pie, and then I have apple pie with my edits where I kind of change some of that. So if you don't have, at the bare minimum, I would say nutmeg and cinnamon would be the 2 things you're going to have. So you mix these together. Now, the thing is that you've got your flour in there. I use flour instead of cornstarch, and that seemed to work okay for me for this recipe. Haven't had complaints yet on it, but the sugar is the one thing that you might have to adjust, and my sugar had a couple like pieces in it, like chunks. So I use a combination of apples. If you only want to use one kind of apples and you're using Granny Smith or another one that's a little bit tart, I'd bump that up to about a cup of sugar. If you're using really sweet apples, and how do you know if they're sweet or not? You gotta taste it. So if you've got really sweet apples, you can decrease your amount of sugar. So you just kind of stir that together so that way that's ready to go. So that's just one less thing that you have to worry about when you're going through and mixing that up later. So, all right, so I've got this all done. Now, like I said, I did my apples. I kind of cut some apples so that way you wouldn't have to have a boring video of me watching me cut apples. So you want 8 cups of apples. This great big thing is 8 cups right here, and that probably would be, I kind of like to do a little bit more. So I have tried a couple different techniques on this because I don't know if you remember, Tabe, we used to have that apple peeler grinder, and it's great. And maybe if I was making like about 3 or 4 apple pies all at once, that would be a really quick way to do them. But just to get it all out and set up takes a lot longer than what I want to do. I used to go through and cut the slices with this and cut those slices and go through and cut it. You can go through, and I'm just wiggling my mouse so that way it doesn't freeze again. You can go through and do it that way and then peel the pieces. You can leave your peels on, but you need to cut them really thin. It's actually better to have them off. So I didn't know, Tabor, if you would have this, so I was just kind of going through different ways of peeling. You can do the peeling, just the whole thing with the knife. That takes a while to go through and do. I actually found another way that I like to do this. So you get this, the potato peeler, apple peeler. This is like one of the cheapest old kind. And so you get the first row. The first row is kind of hard. And you can use this over the sink or over your trash can. So I kind of go down the center and get that. And then just start working that way with it. And you can see it actually goes pretty quick. I found like when I was using the paring knife, after I would make my slices, or even just a paring knife by itself, I was actually cutting away way more of the skin than I do this way. So basically, and you don't have to have it completely. If you have little pieces of the skin, that's okay. Apples. So I said, like, I've got Granny Smith. You always want to have some Granny Smith because it's got that tartness to them. They're pretty firm. So if you're going to mix it with a red apple, you want to go with a firmer-ish red apple. So like a Red Delicious, I wouldn't do that one. That's more of like a good eating apple. You can Google like what kinds of apples are best for whatever, and there's different places that'll list, eating apples are, these varieties, stuff like that. Better ones for baking in pies, for baking apples just by themselves and stuff. So it's up to you. Now, there's a couple little bruises, so I'm just kind of taking off that little part there with it. So that way those bruised areas aren't in there that just get mushy. So it's not that big of a deal. All right, so I learned this technique and I like it. This really made things go so much faster. So you'll want to go through and cut, and you want to cut away from the core. So that way you're going to end up with like a square core. So if you figure, the core kind of goes out. And if you cut out too far, you can always go in a little bit. So this first one, you go through and you just make a slice there. So I still have some meat on there, and I'll get that later. So then I go here, and you can kind of see in the center there. So I kind of got that one a little close, just a little bit, so that's all right. That gives me a good eye to where I'm going. So you just cut this around the 4 sides. And again, like I said, if I didn't get as close to the core as I wanted to, and I want to get a few more pieces, I certainly can. It's not that big of a deal. And then I'll take my knife, and I just want to get just because that little bit that surrounds where the seeds are it kind of has that little husk part of it. So I just cut that out. All right. So then you just go through and slice this, and you just lay them down on their sliced on their flat edges, and just you want to cut them, slice them fairly equal. Thinner slices, they'll bake faster. If you go really thick, you might end up with some crunchy parts to your apples, which is okay. But the consistent size will make your apple pie that much better. But if you do have, like I said, a few crunchy bits because the apple slices are bigger, that's okay. So what I was talking about earlier that you would want to go through if you're cutting up your apples ahead of time, like I did, I started slicing those earlier just so that way, like I said, for ease on the video, so you didn't have to sit here and watch me cut up. And I used 8 apples. These apples are actually pretty good sized. If you can get large apples, that's the best. So this is actually one of the smallest of the Granny Smiths. And then pink ladies or gala apples. Galas are a little bit softer. Pink ladies are a little bit firmer. So count on at least 8 apples for one pie this size of that pie pan. If you're using a little bit smaller pie pan, obviously you don't need as much. So what I did partway through, and I do this automatically when I'm doing it, so even if I've already got that all done, halfway through I got some of my lemon juice. You can either get a lemon itself and squeeze it, or I like having this stuff in here. And you just want to put a little bit over the top, and then you kind of just mix through, and that's why it's easy if you do that like halfway through, so that way half of them go through and get put on there. So yeah, so they're coated, and it's just you do that just to keep them from getting browned. All right, so I'm gonna wash my hands real quick because I've got lemon all over them. And so the next step is going to be putting the apples in the layers on there. So get my pie crust back, and I already put my getting a tablespoon thing. So you just keep the tablespoon out that you used in there. I was stirring that up with a teaspoon. So I want my tablespoon. So you're going to arrange apples in the layer. And so when you're cutting up your apples and put them in here, it's kind of nice if you mix them up, do a red, then do the green. So that way you've kind of got a mix. So you just kind of go through, put these on the bottom, and you make a layer with it. Kind of, if you got them stuck together, unstick them. So you got that bottom pretty much covered. I've got a lot of green ones right down there, so I'm just going to reach down here and get some of the reds. Okay, so then you go through and you are just going each layer, and you're sprinkling with your cinnamon flour, sugar mixture. If you do this in layers, it's kind of nice because that way you get the flavor all the way down. I kind of do a little bit more on this first layer of the flour. And if you get all the way through and you need more flour, you can, and sugar, you can just mix up some more real quick. So just add more. So I like to make mine heaping because I do the lattice on the top. And so what happens is these apples are going to shrink down, and then I have this lattice, and I end up having like this empty part on there. So there's another good layer, and I have a little apple seed on my finger. It was in the bowl, so. Okay, so I'm going to put this, is going to be my last layer. And so, like I said, it becomes a heaping layer. If you're doing a smaller pie pan, what this is, that's deeper or not as big around, you can probably get by, obviously, with doing a fewer apples. What's nice is you can go through and do these and do this, and it's like, oh, I need to slice up 2 more. So, you know, that way you do have a little bit of give and take here. And if I was doing multiple pies, I would have these all sliced up. You can put them in with the lemon. You can put them in a Ziploc baggie and let them stay if you don't have enough big enough bowls to go through and do that. So now I'm going to sprinkle the rest of this over the top. All right, and I'm trying to make it so I don't have to make any more of this, so trying to get it really evened out. That middle layer of cinnamon and flour can be your kind of your lightest layer. All right, so that is done. Again, I'm gonna rinse off my hands. Now, I'm gonna set this aside because I'm gonna work on my lattice top. So this is I'm just gonna set it over here for a minute. The one thing that I did forget to get out was some butter, which I'm going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and pause. So this will be the end of this part because then I'm going to do the lattice as another one. And I can see this is about 23 minutes. And so that way, depending if you want to do a different top or if I decide to do another video with a different kind of top on it, I can do that. So I'm going to pause that, but I'm going to get out butter. I'm going to get 2 tablespoons, 2 to 3 tablespoons of butter. And you'll see me, I'm just going to cut those up into small little pieces because we sprinkle that on the top of the pie. But I will show that part to you in just a little bit.